Last week, we talked about the ways that poems convey meaning through both the type of language that they use and the way that language is presented through the sounds, symbols, and the rhythm of the poems. This week's readings will continue with those elements and introduce the idea of structure. One important element here is the external structure, or how the poem is put together. Traditionally, poets wrote specific types of poems that followed precise rules. Shakespeare wrote sonnets, Keats wrote odes, but what does that actually mean? Essentially, it just means that these poems met specific criteria for the themes that were presented and how the poets conveyed those themes. A sonnet, for example, is a lyric poem made up of 14 lines that deals with two contrasting topics. The Shakespearean or English sonnet is made up of 3 rhyming quatrains, a set of 4 lines, and a couplet, a set of 2 lines. The Petrarchan or Italian sonnet is made up of a rhyming octave, a set of 8 lines, and a sestet, a set of 6 lines. Let's consider one of Shakespeare's most famous sonnets. It's on page 670 if you want to follow along. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark, that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks with his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but it bears out even to the edge of doom. If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. You can see here how Shakespeare's divided his poem into those 4-line quatrains and ended with the rhyming couplet, making 14 lines total. If you've read carefully, you'll also see what's called the turn, where the poem shifts images from love as a star to love as a personified figure who's not time's fool. If you were paying attention last week, you'll also notice the telltale da-dum of iambic pentameter. When we talk about Shakespeare's sonnets, this is what we mean. He wrote this specific format of poetry. A ballad is another traditional form of poetry. Unlike a sonnet, though, the ballad is not a lyric poem, but a narrative one. Ballads were originally folk songs and are marked by a clear story, simple diction, and a repetitive structure, often featuring a refrain. Langston Hughes's Ballad of the Landlord, on page 519, is a more modern interpretation of this form, although ballads go back well into the medieval era. An even older form of poem is the ode. A long, usually serious poem, often in the form of an address, the ode originated in ancient Greece. At this time, odes were dramatic poems sung by the chorus between episodes in a play. You can find John Keats's more recent interpretation in his Ode to a Nightingale on page 599, or Kevin Young's Ode to Pork on page 630. An elegy is a type of poem with death as the major theme and was popularized first in the Renaissance. It continues to be a very impactful type of lyric with poems like W.H. Auden's Elegy for W.B. Yeats. As we move forward in time and encounter movements like modernism and postmodernism, the style of poetry moves away from the firm rules of these traditional styles to more undisciplined forms. One that you'll see a lot among modernists like E.E. Cummings is free verse. This is simply a poem written without consistent structure, rhythm, or rhyme scheme. You can see 2 of Cummings' poems on page 633. Both of these poems use not just sound, but also the visual elements of the poem to convey meaning. Cummings doesn't just describe a leaf falling. He shows it to you as the words drift down the page. Another type of poem that relies on the visual elements is a concrete poem. This is a poem that uses its visual appearance to add to the meaning of the poem, often by creating an image with the words of the poem. Check out Easter Wings on page 664 for a great example of this. Whatever style or form of poetry, the goal is for the author to depict the world as they see it. So as you read this week, ask yourself how the world might be reflected, not just in the words of the poem, but in its structure as well. As always, you have a discussion board post and a journal entry this week. Your second writing project is also posted. Let me know if you have any questions, and happy reading.